Great. Hi, Anne. Do you want to go ahead and test your microphone?
Sure. Good.
All right,
Hello.
we can hear you.
All right, well, we will kick off. Welcome to the April 5th meeting of the Environmental Board. I'm Jamie Finch, and I'll be serving as chair tonight. Due to the virtual format of today's meeting, I'd like to start by providing some guidelines. We have participants attending by computer and others who may be attending by phone. I know tonight we have, just for everyone's knowledge, we do have Laura, at least for part of the meeting, will be on phone, so she's actually already on, and she'll be able to unmute, but you might not see her on your screen. Please make sure to speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you have technical issues, try joining the meeting using a different device, or use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call into the meeting. As always, please, if you have indicated desire to speak in the chat, Laura, I think if you press *3, that should raise your virtual hand so that Stacy will be able to see that. And also we can check in if there's ever time that comments to make sure that there's nothing that you want to share if *3 ends up being a challenge. Please don't put any substantive comments in the chat. And I think with that, Stacy, if you wouldn't mind taking roll.
Thanks, Jamie. Tom Anderson.
Here.
Surya Balapragada, she's working on joining the WebEx. It's just taking a while for her to load. She'll be on shortly. Nancy Davidson.
Here.
Jamie Finch.
Here.
Cameron Fisher has an excused absence. Rishi Hajra. Dan Hintz has an excused absence. Laura Lebeco, I believe we have on the phone.
Yeah, here.
Great. Danny Madden. Don McWilliams.
Here.
Ann Newcomb.
Here.
And Janet Wall.
Here.
Great. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Stacy. Next up, we have approval of the minutes. Stacy, quick question on this. Do you want us to approve those individually, or do we want to ask for comments across the three meetings that we have here?
I think we can go through them maybe as a packet.
Okay.
I think that's fine.
Great. Well, does anyone have any comments on the minutes from February 24th, 2022, March 9th, 2022, or March 10th, 2022 at this time?
Yeah, I've got a couple of nits. This is Tom Anderson speaking. A couple of nits not worth mentioning, but I'll mention them anyway. So on page 9 for the February 24 meeting, Sun River, Oregon reference is made. Sun River is actually one word, not two words. So it's just a little quirk there. And then I had a question on the March 9 meeting. I'm not listed as either attending or absent. I don't know, is that because I was not, I was an alternate and not needed, or was that just an oversight?
Probably an oversight. I'll get that to the PPC recorder. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, that's all I had.
Thank you, Tom. Any other comments from anyone? All right, well, I think then, do we need to then take a vote on whether they're approved as amended with Tom's additions? Okay. Thank you. And then Stacy, would you mind taking us through that process of just approving those minutes with Tom's amendments?
Yeah, thanks. I think typically we just ask for if there's approval or any other changes. Nancy can correct us if we're wrong. Sorry, lack of formality.
All right, I'll help you out, Jamie. So just to this section, and just so you know, I'll fess up. I had surgery yesterday, so I'm not totally on top of my game. That's why I'm asking Jamie to step up on and take on. So just wanted to fess up to what's going on with me. But Jamie, with no other comments, the minutes will be approved as amended.
Great. Well, then consider those minutes approved as amended. Let's see, I think next up is public comments before I go through all of the comments around that. Do we have anyone either attending or that is signed up to speak?
Yeah, thank you. We did receive one written comment from Susan Neville. That's for the discussion later on after John's presentation today. That was sent out to the board. And then we do have one member of the public on the phone. If you want to raise your hand if you'd like to speak, or you can send me a chat as well. I know we've had some issues with the hand raising feature. All right, I don't see anything coming through. Oh, it looks like they do want to speak. I will go ahead and unmute you and move you up to a panelist. Just one moment, Connie.
Thanks, Stacy. And while you're going through that, I'll just provide some guidelines for public comment. Public comments are an important part of the public process. We take them seriously and factor them into the decisions we make. For the members of the public joining us, welcome. If there is anyone in the meeting now who would like to make public comments, we already know that that's Connie. She's already indicated that interest. And then I think when you have been recognized, just unmute your microphone, state name, address, and relationship to the city, speak clearly and pause frequently, and then please do limit comments to 5 minutes and then mute your microphone when done. And now I think I will leave it to Connie.
Great.
Okay. Video's going. Hi, my name's Connie Marsh. I live up on Squawk Mountain, and I'm assuming there's only one public comment today, so I'm going to comment on both topics. One, it's good to have the transportation improvement program coming to this group. I think the most important thing to focus on are the criteria for choosing priorities for the projects, right? We've never used sort of a climate environmental overlay for our projects. And we have the complexity between projects that we have adopted that are very auto-focused in a changing world. So some of my questions would be on how many of these road projects that are for cars must be done, and then how can we make those be as least impactful as possible and not just get more cars to come into our town. So it's time to have that discussion about single occupancy vehicles in our system and what we can do about it. And then the next one is the Title 18 and how all that's going. And I did have a chance to read Susan's letter, and I agree with her comment on the summaries that are being presented seem to actually be very different than what's provided in the drafts. So that conflict to me has made it really hard to understand what I'm supposed to be reading, what I'm supposed to be responding to. Do I just totally ignore the code because they're actually going to create code that goes along with their summaries? So I've done both because I'm crazy. But if I would ask for something, it would be to have a summary of the code language that shows what the intent is and what the results will be from that code. So you aren't reading the language trying to figure out, well, what the heck does this mean? They're telling you what it's supposed to do and what they expect it to do. And then you could agree with what they think it's supposed to do or not. And then if you wanted to, you could read the language and see whether you think the language will actually get that done. But I think the presentation right now has been code and something sort of disconnected. And you need that center portion to make it easier to understand without so much like grueling code reading, which to me is candy, but to most people is a form of small hell. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Do we have anyone else that's indicated interest in speaking, Stacy?
No, we don't have any other members of the public on.
Great. Well, I think with that, we can probably close public comment. Next up, we do have our agenda items. The first one being the Transportation Improvement Program Overview and Review. That will be presented by John Mortensen, Transportation Engineering Manager of the city. So with that, I will hand off to John. John, one quick question while I do that. Would you like us to hold questions to the end, or how would you like questions to be asked throughout the process?
I think just have people raise their hands and let's answer them as we go along, just because there's so much to cover that if I were a board member, I'd forget what my questions were by the time we got to the end.
Great. Thanks a lot, John.
Thanks, Jamie, for that nice introduction. Hello, environmental board members. Thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday evening to meet to talk about the Transportation Improvement Board. I've got a presentation, and as we just talked about, we'll just pause whenever someone has a question and we can go over it at that point. I'll go ahead and get my presentation loaded up, share my screen. And quick question, is it showing the notes page or the presentation?
It's showing the presentation.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, wonderful. Tonight, I'm here to talk to you about the Transportation Improvement Program for the years 2023 to 2028. For the presentation tonight, I'm going to cover a number of things. The first one is, what is the Transportation Improvement Program, and how does it relate to other city plans like the Comprehensive Plan, the Mobility Master Plan, or now the Climate Action Plan? I've got a little bit of information that I researched to talk about related to climate change and transportation. And then we can have a discussion after the material, but like I said, we can have questions as we go along, and then talk about the next steps for the Transportation Improvement Program. The feedback that I'm asking of the environmental board are, the first one's just to ask questions that you have about the Transportation Improvement Program. And the second one is, what are the community values for transportation and the natural environment? The Transportation Improvement Program is a 6-year planning document. It is updated every year. The city prepares it, and oftentimes at the same time when we prepare the capital improvement plan, but it's something that's, we'll talk about how it's a little bit similar and different, and it really shows what are the funding sources and expenses for transportation projects over the 6-year period. The requirements for the Transportation Improvement Program are that it's consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and the city council needs to adopt it after conducting a public hearing. And once it's been adopted by the city council, we file it with the State Secretary of Transportation. The city's comprehensive plan is the long-term planning document that the city has for the goals and objectives, policies, actions, and standards to guide the day-to-day decisions. It's required by the city's growth management, or is required by the state's Growth Management Act. It has a number of elements that are required, including the transportation element. Around 2019 until March 2021, the city was working on its mobility master plan, and this was a document to really guide our transportation decisions, as well as be used to update the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. It was completed in 2020, adopted in March of 2021. It really focused on Issaquah now and in the future, preparing for growth, set policies and goals for the city's transportation system. And now that it's been adopted, we're in the process of doing a number of things to implement the mobility master plan. As I mentioned, the city updates the transportation improvement program every year. And a lot of times it's done at the same time as when the city updates the capital improvement plan. I guess I should say the capital improvement plan gets updated every other year, whereas the transportation improvement program gets updated every other year. And I like this exhibit because it shows the comprehensive plan as the big circle that it really guides the decisions. And then, but to feed into all these different plans, we have things like the parks strategic plan, different studies that we've done, the climate action plan that I know a lot of you guys worked on, utility rate studies for the utility studies, and those go into the capital improvement plan. And then one of the chapters in the capital improvement plan is the transportation improvement program. I mentioned that we're in the process of implementing the mobility master plan. Number of things that the city is doing to implement it is we're updating our street standards to incorporate some of the more multimodal vision that we got out of the mobility master plan. We are incorporating the project criteria into the transportation improvement program. So that way, as we start looking at new projects to work on, that we're considering the guiding principles from the mobility master plan. Another thing that we're working on to implement, though, is to continue the projects that began before the mobility master plan, that a lot of work went into those, and we're going to continue designing and constructing those projects. But as we get those projects done, we're also going to be pursuing, the city will be pursuing new priority projects that align with the guiding principles from the mobility master plan. So as we look at the projects that go into the transportation improvement program, I like to divide it up into several buckets. The first one is annual projects, and I'll go into some of those examples, but those are projects that we do on a yearly basis. They're more of they're projects, but they're kind of like programs. I mentioned the projects that are underway. We'll talk some about those. There's also mandated projects where maybe it's a retaining wall that needs to be repaired, or a bridge that we need to do a seismic retrofit for, or a landslide that needs repair. That I call those mandated projects. They're projects that the city really just needs to get done. And then the new priority projects are the other ones that we look to put into the transportation improvement program. In the bucket of projects underway, got several of them that we're working on. First one is Newport Way between SR 900 and 54th. That's a project that will be, actually that's the project in the picture here. It'll be adding bike lanes, making intersection improvements, doing things to calm traffic and slow speeds, illumination, sidewalk, and then a shared use path that will eventually become part of the Mountains to Sound Greenway Corridor Trail. Another project that we've been working on for a number of years is the Newport Way between Maple and Sunset. This is a project that will construct facilities for pedestrians, bicycles. It does have 3 roundabouts at the intersections of Newport Way and Juniper's the first one, Holly and Newport's the second one, and the third one is at Dogwood in Newport. It'll construct a second southbound lane that'll go from Maple to 900 feet south of Holly. And that project is currently in the design phase. The third project that is a transportation improvement program project that's been underway is the Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized project. That's a project that will build non-motorized facilities from the neighborhood south of Lake Sammamish to the Lake Sammamish State Park. And that's one that we began earlier. We've been doing some of the topographic surveying and wetland delineation, but we're going to start doing a lot of public involvement to shape what the typical section and the details of what that project will actually improve. And it'll be a very high priority project to make progress on. Another project that's been underway is the traffic signal poles in the Issaquah Highlands that we're working to get those repainted. It's going to be broken up into several years of getting it repainted, but I believe that project recently bid for construction for this year. And then the final one that's currently underway is some improvements on Gilman Way. And this is a project, it's in the planning phase where we began before the pandemic, where we came up with a framework for what we'd like to do. And then the next step is to come up with a preferred concept for what Northwest Gilman Boulevard will look like. The projects that get put under the category of annual projects, those are ones like our annual ADA improvement program, where the city puts out a contract to improve curb ramps. And I'm going to pause because I see that there's a question.
Yeah, thanks, John. I was going to jump in. Rishi, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering on the previous slide, if you could clarify what non-motorized improvements would look like.
Sure. Well, there's a variety of different of what it could look like. But generally, when we're looking at non-motorized, considering facilities for bicycles and pedestrians, it could be on-street painted bike lanes, protected bike lanes, shared use path. Those are some of the possible ones. Sidewalk. If we're talking about the Northwest Sammamish Road project, my best guess would be a shared use path and maybe painted bike lanes, but I don't want to get too far ahead of the public involvement process. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. For the annual projects, talked a little bit about the ADA improvement project, and that's an important project because a lot of the sidewalks that are inside of the public right-of-way are inaccessible to pedestrians with disabilities, especially mobility disabilities. And so in situations where we don't have a curb ramp, or maybe we have a curb ramp that's too steep, that we have an annual project to go through and upgrade those. But there's also other things that we do at our traffic signals where there's pedestrian push buttons, that we upgrade those so that way they're audible and will talk to pedestrians. And if you're ever at a newer intersection and you push the pedestrian push button, you hold it for about 2 or 3 seconds, it'll actually start talking to you. And that is something that can help visually impaired pedestrians out. Another thing that we do for ADA improvements is the pedestrian countdown heads. We put in countdown heads, so it'll actually show a pedestrian how long they have to finish crossing the street. The pavement management program is the annual project where the city hires a contractor or different contractors to care for the pavement. They'll do things like overlay the streets, fill in the cracks, as well as other kind of surface treatments. But it's really just trying to preserve the existing pavement. In addition to that, we have a annual concrete maintenance program.
Question from Don. It's all right. Don, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, John. On your pavement management program, do you coordinate that with your other departments like utilities to make sure that the underground repairs get done ahead of that so you don't end up cutting the road up after you pave it? Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of coordination that goes on for the pavement management program, and a lot of times it's very desirable to get those utilities done. So like, for example, in the neighborhood south of Lake Sammamish, a lot of times there's a lot of water line replacement work. And then once that's done, we'll follow up by doing an overlay. And coordination also with different development, because if we know a developer is coming in and going to be doing a bunch of trenching, that street might get skipped and go on to a different one.
Thank you.
Yeah. For the concrete maintenance program, very similar to the pavement management program, where it'll take care of the concrete that just needs to be repaired. And some of the things that the city looks at are curb next to a road that's in poor condition that needs to be repaired, or sidewalk, or another one is where we have street trees right next to the sidewalk. A lot of times the street trees were planted before we knew as much about what we know now, and the roots from the trees are causing the sidewalk panels to have discontinuities, and it creates a tripping hazard. And so we can hire a contractor to come through and grind those smooth and help make it a safer and more accessible sidewalk. We also have this project called the Small Strategic Capital Project. When the city did the strategic plan, one of the things that the city looked at was, or one of the things that came out of it is, a lot of times we try and do these big transportation projects like the recently completed Southeast 62nd Street project. And a lot of the feedback that we heard from the community was, that's great, but there's a lot of smaller scale connections that the city can be doing. And so this project was created. Last year was the first year for it, and we used the funds from last year to design improvements that will be constructed this year. The category of mandated responsibilities is something that a lot of our annual projects, whether it's the pavement management or the ADA improvement project, really a lot of the same projects fall under these categories. So, but some of the nuanced differences are like slide repair projects. So in the year 2000 and earlier this year, we've had a couple slides on Newport Way near the King County Trailhead. So we're actually designing a retaining wall to mitigate the landslide and help protect the road. I threw this picture into the presentation. It is a picture of the Gilman Bridge that goes over Front Street. And right now we're actually working with a structural engineer to put together a potential bridge application to try and get funds to do a seismic retrofit on this bridge. And one really cool thing about this bridge is it's, I believe, the city's oldest bridge. Is built in 1940. The engineer who designed it is, I want to say it's Lacey V. Murrow, who, if you've ever gone over the I-90 floating bridge, that bridge is named after the engineer who designed this bridge for the city of Issaquah. It's also the older brother of the famous broadcaster Edward R. Murrow, something that I found out while working on our grant application and evaluating this bridge. But the final category that I have is the new priority projects. And those are ones that we're looking at based on the criteria in the mobility master plan and the guiding principles that represent the community's values. But sometimes there are obstacles to what we can and can't get done for the new priority projects. And some of the obstacles are funding. We just don't have enough we'll never have enough funds to do what we want to do. Staff capacity. As staff, we wish we could do this much, but in reality, we have this much capacity to get things done. And then sometimes just working through conflicts that with ongoing projects, we're working on something and just don't have the ability to get to some of the new priority projects, but we are trying to work those in.
John, this is Jamie. I had one question, and I know you're going to cover some of these criteria here. I think one of the things that I'd be really interested in is, I know we have a lot of, like, you just went through mandated responsibilities, things that are already in flight, projects that we're committed to in some respect. Is it possible to provide a rough breakdown of kind of within the TIP, how many projects are in each one of these budgets or buckets, and the amount of funds like the percentage of funds that would be allocated in a given year between those categories?
Sure. I could probably, so what I could do, Jamie, is I could load up the 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program, and I could actually just talk through those. And let me just stop the PowerPoint and that up for you. Give me a minute and I'll get this loaded.
While you're doing that, John, I can just let folks know Rishi and Surya have been able to join us, and it looks like Laura's been able to move over from her phone to the WebEx.
Okay, this is the Transportation Improvement Program that was adopted by the City Council last spring as part of the adoption of the Capital Improvement Plan. And so I'll kind of go through what are these categories these projects fall under. And I'm actually going to work my way from bottom to top, just because I think it'd be a little bit easier. The first one is the Sunset Way landslide project, repair project. So this one would be
Oops. I'll go ahead and check in with John on chat real quick.
it's the small strategic capital project. That is an annual project that we have.
John, it does appear that you're back, and
Oh, John, you
lost you for a second. We're seeing your
Oh,
chat.
That was interesting because I heard Stacy say, I'm going to check on John. I could see all of you guys moving, but must have just not been uploading on my end.
Yeah, your chat is up, John.
Okay.
There we go.
All right.
And I think I lost your video. Just 1 second. All right. I accidentally shut off your video, John, but I think we can hear you. I'll go ahead and work on that and get your video back up.
Okay. All right. The Highland Signal Painting Pole project, that is a mandated responsibility as well as the concrete repair. The Intelligent Transportation System program, that is not quite sure what category it. I would say it came out of the mobility master plan, so a new priority project, but I don't know how well it scored on it, but that on trying to do smarter things with their traffic signal came out of the mobility master plan. The Newport Way project in front of Tibbetts Valley Park, that's between SR 900 and 12, the bicycle improvement project, bicycle and pedestrian project, that is one that was a new priority project, although we showed working on it that assumed a grant that we did not apply for. The festival streets, those are ongoing projects that the city's been working on. The city did a streetscape project concept back in 2017, and we've been slowly, as the city's had money, upgrading Front Street and Alder Street to go along with this concept that we came up with. The Black Nugget retaining wall, that was a project that was originally a mandated responsibility. However, we had a geotechnical engineer look at it, and We don't think we need to do that project at this point. So that's one of the changes I anticipate from the updated transportation improvement program. The pavement management program, that's mandated and annual. The Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized project, ongoing project. The Juniper Street improvements, that was a new priority project, although that was one we put in the transportation improvement program, although talking to the Transportation Advisory Board, they recommended not having that project in the transportation improvement program. So that's another one that we're going to probably change as we update the transportation improvement program. The two projects on Newport Way, Maple to Sunset, and SR 900, those are ongoing, as well as Gilman. And the ADA improvement project, mentioned that one. So that one's the annual project. The 12th and SR 900 project, that is, or 17th or SR 900 is where what used to be the Holiday Inn and PCC. It's one of three projects as part of the Costco development agreement to add a second left turn lane onto 12th and to add a right turn lane onto 17th or SR 900. So that was an ongoing project. And then the final one up there is to construct a new crossing of I-90 somewhere between 12th or 10th, kind of in that vicinity. And I would call that a new priority project, although I don't know how well it scored with the mobility master plan, but in terms of the development of Central Issaquah, it is a very important project. And so then in terms of when we look at the dollar values for all of these, a lot of the existing projects are ones that have the highest dollar figures because they can use traffic impact fees, which we'll talk about later, as well as their projects that we've gotten grants for, which make them bigger projects. So in terms of magnitude, the biggest would be the ongoing projects. The annual and the mandated projects are probably in the next category, and the new priority projects, with the exception of the I-90 crossing, which is just a massive project, those are the ones that I think will be smaller in dollars, but as the transportation improvement program evolves and we complete more projects, I look to see mobility master plan priority projects take up a much larger share of the transportation improvement program. Did that help answer your question?
Thanks. And yeah, that last point that you hit on, I was just curious. I mean, obviously transportation projects are long, often take a long time, and the mobility master plan was just something that was recently adopted. So I was curious on what we had already kind of loaded versus what was coming in next. And then, so thank you. And then I believe Nancy has a question.
Thank you. I have two questions for you. First one is, you talked about mandated responsibility projects, and I don't understand what that means in terms of looking at this program. Specifically, you referenced the Black Nugget Road retaining wall and how that was a mandated responsibility, but then it no longer is. I don't understand what a mandated responsibility project is. Can you help me with that one?
Oh, good question. I should have explained that better. So originally we thought that retaining wall was going, not that it would, I don't want to say that it would fail, but it was one that we felt like was at the end of its life and needed to be replaced in order to have a safe road to drive up. And so from a safety point of view, wanting to make sure that retaining wall would hold up during a seismic event. And we had reason to believe that it wouldn't hold up during a seismic event. And so that's why I put under the mandated responsibilities. We need to take care of it that way. If there is a seismic event, we're not going to have the whole hillside wipe out the road and into the back of Fred Meyer.
Okay. Well, I guess I have two more.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, if you weren't finished, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. And then what we did is last fall, there was a grant that FEMA had, and we wanted to look to see if that project would be a good candidate for it. So we hired a geotechnical engineer who did a much more thorough investigation and determined that at this point we don't need to replace that wall because it will hold up during the seismic event that they looked at.
All right, I have two more questions for you.
Okay.
In the early 2000s, the city voted in to tax itself for intelligent transportation system tax, to develop one and to install it. Is that no longer being used, or is it out of date, or why are we seeing it on the CIP again, or the TIP, excuse me?
Sure. Yeah. So what happened is the city put together an ITS plan back then. The voters passed funding, and then we built the projects. But just like our telephones have evolved, where we went from having flip phones to really smart computers that are maps and do all kinds of stuff, allow us to join WebEx meetings, the technology for traffic signals has changed. And so we're, in this first year of the program, we're looking at what are the different technologies and how can we implement technologies to, whether it's to improve traffic flow or to evaluate near-miss collisions. But it's taking the next step of saying, we did what we did back then, what can we do now with the new technology?
And then my last question for you is, you talked about the 12th Avenue left turn lane and that it was part of the Costco development agreement. Therefore, I'm asking, is Costco paying for it?
Yes, they are paying for 48% of that project.
That's an interesting number.
Yeah, there's a master development agreement that the city and Costco executed, which allows Costco to expand their campus by 1.5 million square feet. And there's a whole bunch of details, and I've only read the part about transportation. And so when the city widened East Lake Sammamish Parkway, adding the additional southbound lane that went from 56th and then all the way to Issaquah Falls City Road, they paid for 56 or 48% of that road, and they paid for 48% of the Southeast 62nd Street extension project, and then 48% of the 12th and SR 900 turn lane project.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your answers.
Thank you, Nancy. Laura, you have a question.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Before I go on. All right, great. Thank you for all this work. It's exciting to see how much detail you guys have to manage, like such big picture things and such little details like where the sidewalks go and where's the turn lane. So I have a question and then I'll have a follow-up question, but can you tell me where does environment fit into this, given that that's sort of our charge? Because I see a lot about costs, but I'm not sure about what that means for the bigger picture of like the climate issues we're looking to address.
Sure. I'm going to go back to my presentation. Okay. Are you able to see the PowerPoint? And I'll go ahead and slideshow.
See a black screen.
It looks like it's loading.
Is it not showing it?
It says it's starting to share content. Might just need a minute.
Okay. Back to
And the presentation is now up, but it is in the notes view.
okay. Let me swap that.
You're good.
Okay. So to answer your question, how does actually, can you repeat your question? I want to make sure I accurately answer it.
Sure, I'm trying to follow how this fits into like our scope of what we're charged with looking at and addressing, and want to make sure I'm not misinterpreting how this fits in. Because I know you're
Sure.
saying there's the big plan and then the annual plan.
Yep. So I would say for two ways. The first one is as we evaluate projects, we have a category inside the mobility master plan called promote environment. And so as we look at that part, I think that's something that definitely involves the environmental board. The other part is when I read the Issaquah Municipal Code for the duties and responsibilities that the environmental board is responsible, and I don't remember the exact words, but let me go back in my presentation to the feedback requested to review the transportation improvement program for the community values and the natural environment. And so that's where that question really came down to, is in the duties and responsibilities for the environmental board, it specifically wants the environmental board to provide feedback on the community values for the natural environment as it relates to the transportation improvement program.
So in other words, it's kind of broad for us to give you general feedback. So I'll give you a little feedback thoughts and you can tell me to, feel free to tell me to stop at any time. But I think something we asked for in the climate action plan that I think I would like to see here moving forward is we talk a lot, like there's a lot of discussion that all these details are super helpful for the projects we're doing, but it's only focused on cost. And the cost of environmental damage from transportation is the highest of all categories. So I think we need to start being transparent about the impact that this has directly on our environment and climate. So if that's going to be how many cars, but I think just even tying it back to estimated greenhouse gas emissions, because when you start breaking them out, helping Costco build a turn lane doesn't have the same impact as putting in a bike lane and making Issaquah more accessible. I'm not saying that that is a fault or an oversight of your team, but I think that for transparency back to us and to the public and to keeping it top of mind, the impact of climate, that if you can just tie that back to those emissions targets, that would be helpful. I don't know, I mean, the specifics of what's easiest for you, I don't want to make extra work, but I do want to keep it top of mind for our community that all of these initiatives are still not prioritizing accessibility enough, which we all know, but I think it's important to keep it visible. The other thought is just for, as Jeanette Sadek Khan would say, you know, if you make a city for cars, you get cars. If you make a city for people, you get people. So I would like to see us planning for doing smaller initiatives, which is probably somewhat out of your realm, but smaller initiatives like just closing different lanes down to make them walkable, like closing streets down for more lower cost but faster implementation to help the community realize how accessible we can be when we make more space for us to walk and ride and take buses. So things like that that prioritize more community access and community gathering over street improvements, I think will be helpful. And again, I think that just goes back to making climate and environment more about, like if our transportation needs to be about environment and not just about, you know, providing ways to get from A to B. So that's my general feedback, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very helpful.
Thank you, Laura. I do think we have about 30 minutes left on this topic. I see that we have a comment from Rishi. One of the things I do want to make sure is that we allow John to get through his presentation, and I know he has a discussion section at the end. So I don't know, Rishi, happy to let you comment now. I think my goal would be, though, that we get through the presentation and ask any questions along the way, and then if we have comments, we have that discussion period. So I'll leave it up to you if you want to have a comment
Until the end.
Okay, great. John, you can go ahead.
Okay, so as part of the mobility master plan, project evaluation criteria was created and points were assigned to reflect the guiding principles. And so it looks at how does it improve mobility within Issaquah? And that's 22 points. How does it prepare for growth, knowing that growth is coming to the city of Issaquah? It's 16 points. How does a project connect Issaquah to the region? 12 points. Another 12 points for evaluating how it protects the environment. And 12 points for investing wisely, which would be things like, is a project one that would score well with the grant competition? One of the things that we try and balance as we're looking at our transportation projects is, and I call them neighborhood projects, but versus grant projects. So neighborhood project, I think, is something that a lot of times the community really wants, and that it's a high priority. And then there's the projects that really score well for a grant competition. And I think a lot of times the ideal project that is one that we can easily implement in terms of a funding and getting something the community wants is when we can get that overlap between a project that scores well for a grant and that is something that the community really wants. And so that's something that we really do try and take into account, is getting into that intersecting spot. There's a number of different funding sources that the city has. Some of the external ones come from the state or the federal government. So the state, the Transportation Improvement Board, they've provided a lot of funding for the City of Issaquah projects, including that 12th and SR 900 project. And the city recently was awarded a $500,000 Complete Streets award from the Transportation Improvement Board, where what we're going to do is complete the Juniper Trail. So in front of Gilman Village, right now there's sidewalk, but on either side, there's a shared use path that just stops to become sidewalk. We're going to build that missing gap and then put a little shared use path that'll go from Front Street to the Rainier Trail along 2nd Avenue. And that'll do two things. One, it'll help make a safe routes to school, help kids walk to school, because you keep going to the north, you get to the high school and middle school. But then it also, it's try to get less cars, makes a better connection. That way a bicyclist or a pedestrian could easily hop on the Rainier Trail instead of taking Front Street. The Surface Transportation Program and Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, those are federal programs that we receive funding usually through the Puget Sound Regional Council. The Surface Transportation Program, those are the most flexible funds. That's the funds that we have to design the Newport Way between Maple and Sunset project. The Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, or CMAQ, those are usually targeted towards projects like when King County Metro wants to replace a number of their buses with electric buses instead of diesel buses. That's a program that they look for funding. There are other kinds of projects that the city can compete for, but a lot of times, because it's rated on the air quality benefit, it's hard to compete with Sound Transit or another transit agency electrifying their buses and their fleet. There's Safe Routes to School funds to help make routes for kids to get to school. The WashDOT has a local bridge program. Those are federal funds where you can replace or do preservation work on bridges. And then there's the National Highway System Asset Management Program. That's for taking care of pavement on roads that are on the asset or national highway system. So for example, this year we're working on a project on East Lake Sammamish Parkway and Southeast 43rd that are funded through that next year we'll do pavement overlays. Local funding, there's real estate excise tax that can be used for transportation funding. The traffic impact fees can be used for projects that add capacity for traffic. And there's a certain list in the city's concurrency system of projects that can use those. The city collects from developers bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees. help build non-motorized improvements. The traffic camera on 2nd Avenue near the middle school and high school, a lot of those funds go into the school zone safety fund that can be used for transportation projects. The city council can issue bonds, which is what the council chose to do to construct the traffic signal at Southeast 43rd. For the voters can also approve bonds, or the city council can direct general funds to transportation projects. For the federal funds in our region, the criteria that is used to evaluate those is support for centers. So Issaquah has a regional growth center. And so projects that support the regional growth center are good ones for regional federal funds. As part of the evaluation criteria, besides supporting centers, there are criteria for equity, which includes a number of things, including population served by a project, as well as outreach to develop a project. Safety is another consideration that gets put into these projects. The impact to air quality and climate control is evaluated, as well as the agency's ability to fund a project. Kind of when we make up the transportation improvement program, this kind of going back to what we've talked about, it does need to be consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. We're continuing the annual and ongoing projects, addressing mandated responsibilities, taking care of the city's assets, pursuing new priority projects that came out of the mobility master plan. So you look at our transportation improvement program, we really want to identify the revenue to fund a project, and the city council gets the final decision on what goes into the transportation improvement program. Climate change and transportation is the next little topic that I want to talk about, and a lot of you probably already know, here in the United States, transportation is the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions at 29%, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. One of the best ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation is to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And there are a number of ways to do that, but in looking at some research that the state of California put together that I included in the packet for you, the land use is one of the strongest ways to do that by increasing density for residential as well as commercial. There are other things that the city does for commute trip reduction that also help with greenhouse gas emissions. In the state of Washington, every employer that has over 100 employees that commute to work participates in the commute trip reduction program. There's an annual survey that goes out, and then that information can be used to help employers reduce single occupants commutes to work. Improving a street connectivity, as having a dense or a street grid with smaller blocks is another way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and limiting parking, whether it's on street or as part of a development, that also has a good way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. So I mentioned reducing vehicle mile travel, and in order to do that, shifting modes, getting people outside of their cars and onto buses, trains, bikes, walking, and making sure that we have those facilities, encouraging electric vehicles, and land use is by far, I think, one of the best ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And wanted to make sure that we have time for you guys to talk, so I'm going to go through things pretty quickly. The city has the Central Issaquah plan, which actually does a lot of those things with increased density and improved street grid, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, limited parking, and affordable housing. For the environmental phase, or the design phase, there is a number of things that do go into the environmental considerations that for our projects, we do the State Environmental Policy Act and look at projects' impact to the environment. And when we have federal funds, there is a National Environmental Policy Act that we go through, as well as getting permits, whether it's for a wetland impact or for our clearing and grading. During the construction phase, a lot of things that we look at are related to the environment, are the permit conditions from the environmental permits, how the stormwater is handled, making sure that we're not putting a bunch of sediment or concrete into the stormwater, and making sure that any spills from equipment are cleaned up and that critical areas are protected. And at this point, I wanted to open it up for discussion to talk about the community vision for the natural environment as it relates to transportation projects.
Thank you, John. Rishi, I know you had a comment. Do you still want to make that comment now, or did you need a bit more time?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to reaffirm Laura's point about kind of increased transparency about what impact each of these transportation projects have. It'd be nice to have some kind of indicator as to how much it improves or could potentially improve a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, how it could potentially increase it, and give us a way to compare it to other projects and see potential environmental impacts, both positive and negative, so we can better judge how well it aligns with city priorities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rishi. Did you have any response that you were looking for on that one, Rishi?
Nope. Just
Nancy, you have a comment. Go ahead.
Yes, I would like to echo some of the comments made by Connie early on, and that is the criteria for selection of projects. It's very hard to identify with this list. You have at the very top of the list, they're not ranked as far as I can see, and I can't see what the basis is for the rankings. Is our number one project the new connection between both sides over the freeway, over I-90? I don't remember what the name of the project was, but that is the first one you see on the list, so I assume it's our highest priority project. And I guess that kind of troubles me because the most expensive project on the list seems to be our highest priority project. The second thing I'd like to point out is it's very difficult to see how these projects were scored or ranked. And how they ranked on an environmental basis or other basis. And I guess my third point is the criteria, given that, you know, the city adopted the strong climate action plan and has prioritized doing something about greenhouse gas emissions as something that it has significant targets by 2030. The criteria for the environment or even greenhouse gas emissions is pretty small in terms of the criteria that you identified. It only, I think, had 12 points in your presentation. And it seems to me that if we really want to say that we're trying to do something, we need to significantly increase and maybe have more than one criteria for environment, that it's environmental impacts, improvements to the environment, and significance of greenhouse gas emission. Because right now, we really only see the environment as 12 points, and I don't know what the environment means. Your definition, my definition, and I guess Jamie's are all different. And I think we all need to be on the same page in terms of what we're talking about. And I don't think the rankings is doing that for us. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to provide a little clarification that the order that they're shown in the STIP is not their priority, that whenever we create a new project for transportation, it is assigned a TR number, so TR 004, TR 001. Anyways, I think we're in the 60s right now. And so it's just the order that they get assigned. So when
So
the
what are
project.
what are the priorities on the projects then, if that's not the order of the priorities? I mean, what is our number one priority project in the tip?
Well, when you say that, I could answer which project scored the highest when evaluated by the mobility master plan. And I can pull that one up, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. I think the Newport projects were some of the highest scoring projects.
So who sets the priorities? So if the council allocates funding at a certain dollar amount for transportation improvement projects, how do you know where that's going? What's your number one priority? What's your number two? Don't you have to prioritize those and use the basis for it? Or is it just if you're getting federal state funds for it, that's your priority? But that seems kind of like a screwed up priority system, if you ask me.
So in the mobility master plan appendix, the projects were scored according to the priorities in the mobility master plan. The number one scoring project was to complete the Mountains to Sound Greenway corridor, which is part of the two Newport projects, but it's a much bigger project. The second priority was the Tibbetts Valley Park frontage improvements, which has a name change, but it's basically to construct non-motorized facilities along Newport Way between SR 900 and 12th. The let's see here, another one for the Mountains to Sound Greenway corridor. That project got listed several times. Then the Newport Way SR 900 to 54th, followed by improvements to Gilman Boulevard and adding bike facilities to Southeast 56th. Anyways, I keep going on, and I can email out a link to where the projects are in the appendix for their prioritization. But I would say that the majority of the projects that are in the tip are ongoing projects that, until we get more of these done, is going to take a long process to start implementing all the priorities in the mobility master plan, although the Newport Way projects that we have on there did score extremely high.
Thanks, John. Tom, go ahead.
Oh, yes, Tom Anderson speaking. So yeah, I had some of the same questions Nancy was asking about, and so I was curious about that ranking approach as well, and actually pinged John earlier this afternoon about, hey, I'd like to look at that appendix to the mobility master plan, where all that truth is about, well, what are all those scores that each of the projects evaluated, and what was the weighting on the various factors and all that. And I guess I came away from it, we can't evaluate this tip in a vacuum. We have to evaluate it against the process involving that mobility master plan and the ranking there. And if we have a disagreement about the ranking, well, then it needs to go back to that mobility master plan and adjust priorities there. That's where we could have effect. I guess in my own druthers, I believe that non-motorized transportation is a valuable thing to promote, and we are promoting it, but I think we should promote it even more over cars. And so how would you actually make that happen? Well, you'd go back to that MMP and you would give a stronger weighting for those factors involving non-motorized transportation corridors, and there's several of them in there. And I would bump those numbers up a little bit, then maybe that would change some of the projects that would be decided upon. I'm quite pleased to see the effort on several projects there that John mentioned in the Newport corridor. That's a great example. There is a major transportation corridor for cars as well as non-motorized transportation, and the non-motorized side of it is well, not quite up to what we need, and so this is good. My own pet peeves would be more about the transportation corridor sticking to Front Street and heading up through town. You got bike lanes, and then you hit Clark Street and the bike lanes go away. Well, that's an outrage. That needs to be fixed. Well, that didn't make the cut this year. Maybe it'll make the cut some year. But so if you're, I'll send you your corrected list of projects, John. No, just kidding. But so that's how we could have effect on whether we think these were the right choices, is to go back to the mobility master plan and adjust the weighting of those. Overall, it's a pretty, I'm impressed by the overall system, because it is a complex thing to decide, well, what do you do and what do you not do? There's too many things, you can't do them all, so how do you decide? And we have a pretty good system for ranking them. That's impressive, but each of us would weigh things, add weight maybe a little bit differently, but you got to strike a compromise somewhere. So that's what I learned from looking at it here earlier today. And the bottom line is, I think we do need to shift towards more emphasis on non-motorized transportation, that's going to become a bigger and bigger part of the transportation story in Issaquah, improving the lives of the people who live here and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's the direction we need to head. And are we heading there quickly enough? Well, I don't know. That's the judgment call. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I have some comments. I actually think the mobility master plan is a very good start, and in a lot of ways is very aligned with the goals of the climate action plan. I do think, to Nancy's point and to other people that have mentioned, I do think that now that we have that climate action plan as well as an environmental board, there may be an exercise to go back and more closely define the environmental aspects or the criteria that are specific to the environment, as well as how the climate action plan might influence different aspects of other parts of the criteria. So not to say it's perfect, but I do think the mobility master plan, I was actually, I hadn't reviewed it before, and I thought there was a lot of really interesting elements. And so first of all, applaud kind of where the city has landed there. I do think we have maybe some more work to do with some of the things that have happened since that plan was finalized. I think, echoing some of the comments that were mentioned earlier, I do think the accessing of that information. So for example, I would ask the question, should the TIP have the scoring of each individual project? And I know some of these are probably predate the mobility master plan, so maybe they don't have a specific scoring, we'd have to go back. But should the TIP have scoring from the mobility master plan going forward? I mean, it shouldn't probably be someone needing to go back between the mobility master plan and that TIP document every time. I think that would be super valuable, just to make sure that we know that some things are not going to be, we can't choose all of our projects. Some will be mandated, some will have other aspects that are just kind of ongoing maintenance. But I do think one of the things, and we're struggling with this now with the ICAP, we're not struggling, but trying to figure it out, is you have this great mobility master plan. I think, how does that now influence capital decisions going forward? I think that connection is an area that I'm not clear on. I think we're all maybe not sure on how that comes together. And really, that's going to be the rubber meets the road. We're going to have a certain amount of our budget that we have to spend on certain projects. Then we're going to have some maybe discretionary income that we can put towards projects that we really care about. And I think Nancy mentioned, like, what are our priorities? How are those communicated? And how do we make sure that those projects are the ones being funded, is something that I'm not really clear on. And I don't know if that's in the scope for today's meeting. I don't think it probably is, but I would just say that's an area that I think there could be a lot of work done to ensure that going forward, next year's TIP and when we get to the next CIP, that we're really thinking about it with that lens on the projects that are being selected. And so I think the last piece is, I know this meeting is really focused on capital projects, and I'd sent you some questions around some of the programmatic elements. I think another thing that comes to mind is we're talking about transportation, metro. Some of these things are not capital in nature. And so I would just encourage, we don't have time to cover a comprehensive, what does a transportation program look like, in addition to like how we're spending funds to build kind of the infrastructure for it. But I do think, I would encourage that we should probably revisit that topic more broadly, because I do think there's aspects, and you mentioned a few in your response, but also metro, I think how we engage with Metro, how we encourage more opportunities or more options for citizens is something that I think is critical. And so if we're only talking about capital projects, I think we're missing a big part of that. One of the things I mentioned to you is in my email is that I really think that some of those California, I don't know if you put those in there, if Stacy put those in there, but the California, I can't remember but all the different rankings and their potential for greenhouse gas mitigation, that was super interesting. I went and read, that was so interesting. So, and a lot of those are not purely capital, and some of them have no capital aspect to them at all. And so I would ask the question, not only for this meeting, but also more broadly, how is the city thinking about a comprehensive plan for transportation that incorporates the capital elements as well as the programmatic and kind of Metro partnership-based ones? And I think that's the mobility master plan. I didn't see that. I think there's really great things about the mobility master plan. I'm not sure it was hard to figure out how that all comes together. So I do think that that's something that I know that myself and I think the rest of the board would have a lot of interest in engaging on as we get further into the process of implementing. But that's just one thing I wanted to call out, because I do think the non-capital elements are in some ways something that we can move even quicker, or at least solve, or are a really important part of a comprehensive transportation plan. Thank you. Let's see. It looks like we have a comment from Janet.
Oh, yes. I wondered whether you had any, you taken into consideration in your plans, whether you're building additional barriers to wildlife that has to cross some of these streets or go under a bridge, and to try to make it so that they can still migrate. One of my pet peeves is those huge sound walls that they've put up near the state park that is going to make it difficult for wildlife to get across.
Impacts to wildlife would happen during the environmental phase that happens, or the environmental review that happens during the design phase. Now, more often than not, that is more looking at endangered species and not necessarily looking at animals that are not endangered species. Does that answer your question?
Janet, did that answer your question? Do you have any other comments on that topic?
Janet, you are muted. I can try and unmute you, but if you want to go ahead and try first. All right, Janet, I can try unmuting you on my end if you want to respond, or if you have any follow-up. There we go.
Yes. Well, that doesn't make me very happy, because I still feel that, there are the different Issaquah Alps, that they can become so isolated that they are no longer reproductively viable. And as I say, I really don't like those big sound barriers that really narrow the ability of wildlife, and there's no way of getting underneath I-90. So I just like to see a little more consideration about where these important wildlife corridors are, and to make sure that there's some kind of allowance or consideration.
Thank you, Janet. Dawn, you're next up.
Yeah, thank you. John, as you look at these projects, I'm going to shift focus on you a little bit, and I would encourage you to look at the pollution that's coming from the roadways as part of these projects with relation to your runoff. So encouraging green stormwater infrastructure wherever you can build it, use it first and foremost before you go to traditional measures. Also, when you're crossing, streams, whether they be major streams or just small drainages, often I see municipalities, they don't increase the roadway footprint at that point because they don't want to replace the culvert. But it is an opportunity to potentially replace that culvert. So factor that into your projects as you're moving along. That's, speaking to Janet's point there, that creates a wildlife corridor. If you increase that culvert size for the critters to get under there and whatnot.
Thanks, Don. And one of the things I did want to add is one of the things that we're finding, and this is really showing up first on the Newport Way SR 900 to 54th project, is, I don't know if you guys remember, but just over, I don't know if it's a year or two ago, there was new research showing that material from tires is killing salmon. And that project is actually on hold because the National Marine Fisheries is doing a much more in-depth review about transportation projects' impact on salmon. And until that gets done, they're not giving us our approval. So as we look at, and there, we were going to treat the stormwater, and a lot of times that would have been focused on the treatment of heavy metals, which we definitely want to keep out of our streams. But now we're looking at the materials from the tires. And I don't know what the solution to it will be, but that is something that is very much something that we're looking at. And I would say in general for the project footprint, it is generally better to have a smaller footprint. And I'm not saying to try and not replace fish passage culverts, because that project will replace a whole bunch of fish passage culverts. But in terms of its environmental impact, the smaller our footprint is, especially the pollution generating impervious surface where the cars are, is a very important for the stormwater and aquatic wildlife.
Thank you, John and Don. Laura, you have the next comment.
Hi, I have two comments. One is I was looking through the mobility master plan, and there's a lot of talk about commuting, but I think that we're overlooking some of the residents, and one is like the other uses that people have. And I think that coming, as Jana was saying, to see the wildlife and see the accessibility to mountains is a reason that people will come to Issaquah and continue to. So I'd like to see some maybe consideration of like multi-use things, not just economic. And then also to echo like that I would like for us to see wildlife as a resident, not just a consideration. I think we probably are all on the same page for that. And the second is I'd like to see a little more talk of equity. A lot of the transportation planning is talking about cars, but how much, I just would be interested in making sure that we're considering that we're thinking about people who don't have cars, who cannot drive cars, making it, transportation and mobility something that's considering specifically equity as part of, because if we're not making sustainability equitable, we'll forget a lot of things.
Thanks for the comments.
Thank you, Laura. Anne, you're up next.
Thank you. Anne Newcomb here. And thank you, John, for responding to my email today. Those are great responses. And I just wanted to reiterate that I think it's really important that as we're building things, we look at the building materials and their carbon footprint, and as often as possible, purchase the asphalt that has less of a carbon footprint using recycled materials. And I think in your response, you said that Washington is creating more of those opportunities. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I think what I was saying is the Washington's Department of Transportation, they're the leader on that. And I don't know what they're looking into for the future, but they've been a leader in using recycled asphalt pavement. So a lot of times when a new road is built, a good percentage of the pavement is old asphalt that's been recycled or asphalt that's been reclaimed from a roofing shingle, as well as the state of Washington has some pretty ambitious laws on using recycled concrete aggregate. So that can be used back into concrete, or it could be used underneath the road as the base to build on. But for those materials, the research of being able to find what new materials will work and how to use them, that's something that we have to rely on the state for.
Yeah, so I guess it's a comment that I should make to the state. There's also the carbon cure and the different concrete that is sequestering carbon and in the concrete, and different practices to make more environmentally friendly, less greenhouse gas emission concrete. So I think the more we talk about it, the more it's going to happen. And I know Washington's very forward thinking. So I will write a letter to them. And thank you everybody for bringing up the mobility master plan and having a good discussion around that. I think it's a brilliant observation and a good path forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Laura, you have a question?
Yeah, short question, and get into it as much or as little as you'd like, but I would be curious to know what input you have that you think that we should be keeping top of mind in our feedback to City Council, or in general in ways that we can support you, or in ways that are, maybe aren't always on everyone's radars.
Well, I've gotten lots of great feedback, and as we go forward, and I think some of the next steps when I get to that part, I think you guys will look forward to some of the next steps. Some of the things that going forward, I want to do a little bit of research, because some of the things I hear is transportation on the greenhouse gas emissions for transportation projects, and researching how can we go about doing that. And I don't know at this point how easy or difficult of a task that is, but that's something I want to look into. I definitely hear the priority of people over cars, which aligns a lot with the mobility master plan. And I think from the environmental board's point of view, it probably can't happen fast enough, but we are making that turn. If you think of maybe our transportation plans as an aircraft carrier, and we're trying to get turned around to head there, but there's a lot of other work that's already been underway, like that 12th and SR 900 project to add those turn lanes. But the general direction that we're heading is in a much more multimodal one that will have facilities of bikes and peds, and there still will be a place for cars, but I do want to say that we are making a turn towards a lot more non-motorized stuff too.
Thank you, John. Any other comments or questions? Great. Well, I think, John, thank you for joining us. And I'm sure this is the first of many conversations with our board and transportation team at the city. So appreciate you joining us, and look forward to future conversations.
Yes, and I did want to, I'll go quickly talk about next steps. So for the transportation improvement program, based on the feedback that I got from the environmental board and the transportation advisory board, I will be working on preparing the transportation improvement program that will be presented to the city council at the May Mobility and Infrastructure Committee meeting. And so this feedback really helps. I'll see how much I can utilize it, if there's a way to incorporate the scores from the mobility master plan. I will put one asterisk because we're not updating the capital improvement plan. This is going to be a minor update and there won't be a whole lot of changes. That bigger changes would be in store next year. The plan, I believe, is to hold the public hearing in either late May or June, I can't remember which, and have council adopt the TIP in June. And then in the second half of 2022, and this is the item I really want to mention to you guys, I'd like to have a joint meeting between the Environmental Board and the Transportation Advisory Board to talk about how to incorporate the Climate Action Plan into the transportation prioritization. And I know that's something that I heard from you guys and wanted to let you know that that is something that I would like to have happen in the second half of this year. And thanks for having me as a guest.
Thank you, John. And then I think next up we have a discussion on Title 18 process that Stacy will be leading. Hand it over to you, Stacy.
Great, thanks. Thanks, John. All right, I am just going to bring up the memo that was shared as part of your packet. Right. Just give me a moment to rearrange my screen. Okay. Great. And Jamie, can you see the memo up?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. And just as a reminder, as we go into this discussion, we did receive the written comments from Susan and then had comments this evening from Connie that related to this topic. We just wanted to recognize all the work that the Environmental Board has been doing in reviewing Title 18. We have had a lot of meetings. There's been a lot of information sent your way. This is an important component of the work that the Environmental Board does. And your expertise and input is incredibly valued and very important to this process. However, again, there is a lot going on and I wanted to check in with you all and see how the process is going and how we might be able to improve it. So we've put forward a couple of questions to you all tonight just to hear from you in general about how you think the process is going on the Title 18 review. Interested in hearing more about whether you feel you're receiving the right content, if you have enough time to prepare, and then also just hearing about whether you feel like your comments are being heard. And then as we wrap up this discussion tonight, I also did want to hear from folks on whether or not the process we use to pull your comments from our previous discussions into a memo to send to council, if we want to continue doing something like that going forward. So I think I'll mostly just open it up, just really want to use this time as a check-in and hear from you all on how we might make some improvements to the process to help you all better prepare and provide the important feedback that you have.
Thanks, Stacy. One quick question for you. Do you want it to be a free-for-all or do you want to work through this in order?
I am fine for it to be a free-for-all for folks to focus in on where they want to respond. I just wanted to tee up some questions to get the conversation going. But I do want to make sure at the end that I have some direction on how we want to proceed with the meetings going forward in terms of capturing comments.
Great, that's super helpful. All right, does anyone have comments? I know everyone's read so many packets. There have to be some comments on everything we've read. Well, I will kick off then and I'll wait for everyone to formulate their thoughts. I think my biggest challenge with Title 18, and part of this is it's an incredible breadth of information. So it's like hard for anyone, the city, to synthesize it down. But what I'm really having issues and what takes a lot of work to understand is we've had policy level discussions in the past about what we want to see with setbacks, what we want to see with changes to Title 18. What I'm having difficulty tracking is how those policy level decisions as well as just policy level thinking from the city is being translated into what is actually being proposed as changes. I think in a lot of cases it's happening, and sometimes the summary at the top sort of hits on that. But I really think finding a way to more clearly tie those all together would be really helpful. And I don't mean to say that that's going to be easy. I know that there's a lot to do there, and it's really challenging, but that would really help to just make sure that we're talking about the right things, because I think that I'm always afraid as I'm reviewing, like, am I reviewing for the right topics? Am I really making sure that I'm reading the sections that are related to the policy level items that we've covered and that I think we've all said are really important? And it often takes a little more work than I would hope to get there. So I will leave comments on the other sections, but just wanted to get us kicked off in hopes that maybe some others will jump in before covering some of the later questions. Nancy, you have a comment?
I guess I am a little concerned about how this is kind of all playing out personally for me. I'm having a hard time tracking the summaries. What have we changed? What did we start with, as in the current code? What have we changed and why are we changing it? And you don't see any of that. You don't ever go back to the current code. And so I'm concerned that, you know, they're making big changes in documents that are 80 pages long that are hard to understand. Why are we changing it and what are we trying to get out of this? Why are we changing this? And so it feels like you're reading this and maybe the last code was good, but you just don't know. The other thing I'm concerned about is there's always places for variances or administrative changes, and we haven't seen those yet. And usually that's where the loopholes happen and the environment takes it, or basically is more significantly impacted. And so when I asked about that, I was troubled that, oh, that's coming later and may not come to you. Well, to me, that is the place where you see the loopholes start to show. So my big concern is that in about August, in talking to many, we are going to get a 500-page document delivered to us that we're going to have a couple of weeks to review, which is all of Title 18. And I'm not certain if that will help us understand how our comments were interpreted, how PPCs were interpreted, how councils were interpreting it, or if we're going to actually have to read all of these sections again to try and figure out what feedback we gave them and how it was used and what it means. And so I guess maybe I'm just flatting right now because I'm not totally with it yet, but I just am real concerned about how this is going to continue to evolve as it comes to it, because it's my understanding it is coming back as a large document to us at some point soon. That's my comments.
Thank you, Nancy. Anne, you the next comment?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I'm always concerned about is, are we creating more work for city staff that are already overburdened for us to understand? And then as Nancy was saying that, I realized that I've read documents like from the UTC, the Clean Energy Transformation Act. So like when that was being written, they just kept it all together, and it was, lines were crossed out that they were taking out, and then lines were added. So you could see what was taken out, what was added pretty easily. So I don't know if that would make it more clear and simple. And we might be past the point of being able to do that easily, but possibly looking to ecology rules and the UTC and different organizations that are always getting comments on new rules and legislation, and then adding it in might help us to make it more clear. That's it.
Thank you, Anne. I had a couple other comments on the later questions. I do think one of the other concerns I have, and this is actually going back to the first question, and really it's a comment on process, is there's a lot of new policy level things being proposed, but being proposed in a huge document. And so I do think it should be incumbent upon staff to ensure that we're not only not asking for comments on the code and all the details, but making sure that there's time set aside to discuss the policy level changes that are being proposed. And in the first place, just identifying what those policy level changes are and how that makes it into the code itself. So I think that's one thing. The other, I mean, I understand that there's timelines outside of what the board has. It just feels like we're going really fast, and that's meaning that we have a lot of meetings with multiple boards. And again, I know there's constraints on people's time, city staff, and timelines, but that I think it makes it really difficult, and it's putting a lot of strain on our board. We have a lot to do, and like this next week is a great example of that. 3 meetings is a lot, and a lot of topics to cover. And then finally, just commenting on the additional memos, I think there's a lot of value in those additional memos. I think that making sure that the comments from the board, and I want to be sensitive to your time, Stacy, but I actually think that's a really good use of your time, because making sure that separating the comments out that we've made on these topics is, I do think it really valuable, and it's actually a part of our what we were put in place to do. So I really appreciate Nancy bringing that up in the first place, and I think that there's a lot of value personally in that process. Tom, you have a comment?
Yes, Tom Anderson speaking here. So I just wanted to comment on scope of material covered in a meeting. Now, I guess there's 2 parts to this: the scope of material that we have to review in preparation for a meeting. And well, lucky me, I'm retired, so I can take the time to go through that 100 pages of whatever. That I'm okay with, but some of our meetings have run long. And after 3 hours sitting in a meeting, I'm not gonna bring up a comment or question. I need to go to the bathroom. So anyway, effectiveness is lost beyond the 2-hour mark or so. So that we need to perform due diligence on figuring out, well, how much material can we actually cover in the time frame that we have, and if we need another meeting, I would rather have more meetings than longer meetings. That would be my druthers on that, because I can't effectively function for a 3-hour meeting. So that's my feedback on that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Any other comments? I don't want to call on people, but I'm really curious for everyone's feedback on this, because I do think we've all been in these, and some people feel more disposed to contribute than others, but would love to have everyone's perspective in this feedback. So if there's any, even if it's a short comment, would love to hear what you have to say. Stacy, any questions, any finer points you want to put on this or questions that you feel like you need some more feedback on to help inspire some more feedback, or do you have what you needed?
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, just one other comment on the memo I can make, and then it looks like Laura had a comment. I think ideally we would have had time to bring a memo to council to this board for review and approval, and have it more speak on behalf of the whole board. I think that could be the goal going forward if timing allows, but otherwise I think it was much appreciated from PPC, the planning staff, and council to have just a summary of comments, as we had to do for the last memo. So just depending on timing, we can plan to move forward with that. Memos and the format of them will just vary depending on whether we have time to bring it to the full board. But it did look like Laura also had a comment.
Thank you, Stacy. Laura, go ahead.
Hi, this is Laura. I guess I'm only taking the bait for Jamie here, but I I feel like it's been gangly, but I think a lot of things have because we've just, are getting up and running. But I do feel this need to pick a lane and for us to prioritize the most important work we should be doing. I agree that probably this is probably more important than a lot of other things, but at the same point, and environmental initiatives can't just be only our responsibility. So there are I would like for us to be like focusing on the highest best use and maybe not as much the nitty gritty. I don't know where that line is, but I think my sense is it just feels like sometimes it's super, super detailed and then we scale way back and then it's super detailed and it's kind of like, it'd be nice to have some consistency so that we can bring our best skills forward. But otherwise, I'd just be interested in, I think, Stacy, I feel like we trust you to figure out where that good place is to land. But so that's just my perspective. But if you have any feedback or thoughts for us, I'm sure you can chat with Nancy and Jamie on it.
Thanks, Laura.
Rishi, thank you for people that are speaking up. I appreciate it. Rishi, you're up next.
Yep. Thank you. So I agree with most of what's been said. I think in general, it would be very useful to have those additional memos that kind of summarize our comments on the sections. I also think like increased back and forth between the council and the environmental board would be useful so we can kind of see how they're receiving the feedback and whether they're implementing it, whether they're not, and then what their rationale is behind those decisions. So that can spark, I think, important discussion as to how our feedback is being interpreted and whether we have kind of the same priorities and thinking on the same wavelength. That would be useful. I understand that might not work or be feasible in terms of time and workload, but I think having that back and forth is important too.
Great.
Thank you, Rishi. Nancy, you have a comment?
I just wanted to kind of respond to Rishi a little bit. If you have a chance, the council reviewed those sections which were like landslide and wetlands and stuff. They discussed that at the last council meeting, and it is an interesting watch if you have an opportunity. They were fairly complimentary to our work, and it's available on YouTube. Also, I think that at the next meeting, we asked Minnie to talk about what the council's feedback was back to PPC and to ourselves. So if you don't have a chance, she's going to at least summarize it, but it's always best to hear it from the council members themselves. Just some feedback.
Thank you, Nancy. That brings up actually one other thought from me, which is just around joint meetings. I actually wonder if the same approach could be used. I understand them wanting to have us be on a meeting with PPC for PPC to hear our feedback. I'm just wondering if that's truly the best approach to get our feedback heard and captured properly. I do think looking ahead to later this week where we have 3 boards, it's just, if that's supposed to be the forum where we provide feedback, that just, it seems like a system that's not going to work. And so I wonder if actually the memo approach could be used in lieu of, obviously this would still involve city staff presenting at multiple meetings, but I just wonder if there's different approaches that would involve that memo to not only be used for council, but also for like PPC, for example. Because part of the problem is PPC is kind of mandated to be in the weeds at the level that I don't think we're necessarily always supposed to get to. So that would allow for more tailored agendas as well. So yeah, one thought that prompted from other comments. Any other comments from board? Dawn, you have a comment?
Yeah, just on your comment there, Jamie. I like that idea. If I'm following it correctly, it's something along the lines of they would provide us a memo directing us what they're looking for. So where they want us to focus. Is that kind of what you're thinking? And then we would be able to have our own discussion and respond back to them.
No, I was actually thinking the opposite route where we, like the city would bring us a topic. So like what we would be discussing on Thursday, but as opposed to doing it in a joint meeting, it's just the environmental board. And coming out of that meeting, we're getting a memo out that PPC could use. I understand there's time constraints, but it would be we would provide feedback on the areas that we think are important and highlighting the areas that we think are critical for their review of that same part of the code.
Okay. I guess where I'm going at with you is I agree with you that these joint meetings can, while they're interesting, can sometimes more often than not be quite unproductive because there's just too much going on.
Great. Well, that is fantastic feedback. Thank you. I will take that. I'll share with the PPC staff tomorrow ahead of our next meeting on Thursday, and then also look at how we improve the process going forward, maybe getting away from the joint meetings, but definitely moving forward with the memo approach.
We do have
yeah, go ahead.
And it looks like we have actually a couple late breaking comments. So Anne, do you want to share your comment?
I guess I just feel like the joint meetings, since it's on the same subject, are fairly efficient because then there's just one big meeting for everybody. But it's mostly more efficient for staff. And so I guess I'm looking out for staff.
Thank you, Anne. Nancy?
Well, I just wanted to state that I would encourage everyone to speak up at the next meeting. I know 3 boards, it's going to be challenging to communicate together, but I think we come at it from a different perspective than the other 2 places. PPC is kind of the administration of the codes, and the Parks Board is really focused on parks. We're looking at the big picture overall stuff. And I have seen in the past, I think that the Environmental Board is a little quieter at times at some of these discussions, and I would encourage us at least to get our voice heard. That's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And then I think with that, we probably conclude our regular agenda items. We pull up our agenda. So I think next, reports. Stacy, reviewing the 2022 Environmental Board's schedule. I'll hand that off to you.
Great, thanks. I'll be brief. Just as folks are aware, and just as a final reminder, we do have that joint meeting on Thursday with the Parks Board and PPC at 6:30. That's to review landscape and tree canopy sections of Title 18. We do have a regular meeting next week as well. I know we have a few folks that will be gone due to spring break. We've repurposed that meeting to focus on ICAP updates, and there'll be a couple of topics I'll be looking for your input on. But looking forward to that discussion. It's been several months since we've had a chance to talk specifically about the ICAP, and we're getting to launch a couple of campaigns, so look forward to sharing those with you. That packet should be coming out tomorrow, so just wanted to give folks a heads up since there is a lot going on right now with our meeting schedule. I have a couple other very brief updates, Jamie, when the time is appropriate to share those.
Please go ahead.
Okay, great. No updates on in-person meetings, but I will alert you as we learn more about those. And then just wanted to let folks know that we did have 4 positions that were open on the board this year. Nancy, Jamie, and I completed interviews with the applicants, and we've passed on our recommendations to the mayor's office. Those positions will be filled in time for our May meeting, and we also anticipate holding elections for our chair and vice chair at the May meeting. And then we are also starting the interview process for the sustainability intern. We had over just about 40 applications and really well qualified folks. So excited to start talking to them, and hopefully we'll have that person on by our May meeting. Those are all the updates I had.
Thank you, Stacy. Any other announcements or reports from the board? And it looks like you have one.
I remembered one more comment on our processes. Stacy, I just want to say that the way that you are sending out your emails and organizing everything makes it very easy for me to find, and it makes it easy for me to find the meeting link and all the information. So I appreciate the way you're doing that.
Great, thanks.
So there's a couple times in the past, and I think it even happened with some of the joint meetings where I'm really searching hard to find the information. So maybe I need to improve my processes, organizing my emails. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Any other items from the board? All right, well, hearing none, I'm sad I'm going to be missing the next couple of meetings as I'll be away, but everyone have a great spring break if you have that, and look forward to meeting up with you all in May, and that we're adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.
Hope you're going to be out having fun, Jamie.
I hope so too, yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.